log in to KofiPaisaTV.com and get Spears of the Mossy Volume 1 by Kofi Paisa Research Team, From Spears the Pen Volume 2 by Kofi Paisa Research Team, Spiritual Combat Volume 3 by Kofi Paisa Research Team, One Night Before Bed by Any Haret Shun Calfunny, Kalawa's Trip to the Motherland by Kofi Paisa, From Cocaine to Consciousness by Any Haret Shun Calfunny, As I Learned, We All Learn by Kofi Paisa. Also, if you want fresh merch, go to our online store, Family Connect Apparel, and get all the brands. Also, get our 54 deck of quiz and educational cards available now on KofiPaisaTV.com.
ETM Hotel, Rennie Sean, welcome in peace. My name is Sean. I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in to Kofi Paisa TV. I see we got some people in the building. I have hijacked Kofi Paisa's Facebook, and I'm live. So please like the show, share the show, tell a friend, tell a friend. We are live on Kofi Paisa TV. We're about to get it in. Peace, Chauncey. What's good, brother? I see you in the building. Peace to all of those listening in the audience right now. Peace to you. I'm sending a subliminal message out to the black church enthusiasts. It's a little warning shot. Yeah, I'll focus on it all you want to, you know. You keep on wanting to infuse the African American experience, the religion into the African American experiences, as if it was the religion that brought the African American out of its situation. Compelling argument for somebody who don't study, right? It's being insinuated that black people had to have religion in order to justify, or not justify, in order to actively get itself out of the situations that plagued the African in America. It's what you say. When I listen to people like Pastor Bennett, you know, he's big on the black church. The black church, we were always Christians. We were this, all of that foolishness. That's what it was. And then he says things like, well, you know, I praise brother such and such because brother such and such, you know, is honest in his assessment. No, you praise brother such and such because brother such and such, you know, gives you an open door. Gives you an open door. We all know that. Yeah, he leaves a little room for you to come on in the door. You know what I mean? We used everything as a tool. It wasn't just Christianity. We used Islam as a tool. Did you know that? Huh? Some folk that came over here that got off the boat were Muslims. Converted. Muslim. Other people that got off the boat were Christian. Converted. Christian. Neither one of those were African. Now, see, I can lay down my argument in writing. But today I just decided to have a little fun. And I'm going to shed some light on, you know, the whole Christian narrative, because you use W.E.B. Du Bois a lot, Mr. Pastor. You weighed heavily. You appeal to authority with a couple of your sources was pretty biased. Like, you didn't get any African perspective in your argument. You know, you went to slave narratives, but you didn't listen to them slave people tell you. They knew not no Christianity. You gonna pull out the slaves and then you ain't gonna let them speak all the way? You're going to cherry pick which ones, to say whatever you want to say to sway it, to make it seem like the black church just always did everything. No, it wasn't never the black church. It wasn't no religion. None. Zero. The will of people is bigger than a belief. I'm going to say that real slow. The will of the people is bigger than a belief. Meaning, if you step on people long enough, they're going to look at each other in the face and they're going to make a business decision. That business decision is going to be, we need to fight for our lives or we die. What is it going to be? We going to roll over and die, or we going to band together and ball? Oppression led the way. It wasn't a belief in a particular person. They can draw upon anything that they want to draw upon, because you have people in America in the early 1800s, 1700s, 1600s, even the 1900s, that was drawn up on some African spirits, right? African spirits, to help them look for a sign. Right? It wasn't this, man, we was just staunch Christians when we came over here. We knew what we was doing right here. Man, they used Christianity as a tool to separate and divide and conquer. If you just want to be real, why you don't talk about that? Why you don't talk about them people teaching certain people in the community who seem to have a command for the word, right? They teach them, how, look, you need to teach your people these words of God. They indoctrinated them right now. To this day, they tell people what to preach. Do they not? You gonna say they don't? Why when everybody go to church on Sundays, y'all preaching the same stuff that y'all preached last year, the year before that, and the year before that? The only time you actually are able to talk about something outside of that is when people challenge you on certain parts of the Bible that normally the lay person don't even know nothing about. But we bigging up the church, right? It's the church. It ain't the people, it's the church. Well, see, in Nashville, the Negro built the black church. They needed to build a place for them to organize. And the only creditable, and I find this astonishing, is when we look back at African American history, the preachers were rewarded for being preachers. Why is that? Why is that? See, this is the privilege that African Americans gave to America. This is where white supremacy rules. Because had we rejected these things in the inception, and we said no to all of that stuff, right? We just went to war about it. They brought us over here. We got off the boat. We just continuously went to war about it every day. Like, wars didn't happen. They did. But if we just went to war about it, America would never have progressed. But they needed a silly Pastor Bennett to say, hey guys, look, this is us right here. See, it's the story right here, Master. Tell us, Master told me all about it. No, I'm just picking with you, Pastor. So, what I set out to do today is I want to drop something on y'all real quick. I'm reading from Themes in West Africa's History. It's the book. I don't have no PDF. You know how I do. I get the physical copy. And I'm reading chapter 7, page 142. It's written by Obing, Pashington Obing. And he says, there go my brother. My bad. But he says, And I'm coming for both of them. But he states right here, he says, the 8th to the 11th centuries, he argues, witnessed the Ibadu Muslim merchants practicing a self-imposed mercantile quarantine because they did not reach out to the West African communities. Ryan's third and fourth periods mark when Muslims and European Catholic societies, upon their arrival between the 5th and 19th centuries, began to mix the local people in a limited fashion. For instance, Christianity only reached beyond the castles and forts of the Europeans to mixed races of the mulatto population along the West African coast. By the time he gets to this 10th period, Ryan demonstrates how the 20th century became the period for the Re-Africanization of Islam and Christianity, although there are still some Muslims and Christians who associate indigenous practices with paganism or the lack of a total devotion of Allah. Given the dynamic nature of religion, there will always be moments of convergence and divergence between some official position of religious authorities and what happens on the ground. Most scholarly writings on West African indigenous religions have generally focused on beliefs, practices, languages, and people. Those who pay attention to the history of the indigenous religions tend to discuss interaction among Islam, Christianity, and indigenous religions. They know full well that indigenous religions are not static, and that the politics, environment, economics, and other aspects of Western people lives were intertwined with the religious before the advent of Islam and Christianity. Such discussions often leave out the African agency factor, whereby individuals and communities have always played a key role in a religious change. So this is where it gets interesting, because he mentioned African agency. See, many times when we talk about history and we look toward and we talk about African American history, whose agency are we speaking of? You know, we got great people like W.E.B. Du Bois, right? You had all the talented 10th. They're very well affiliated with a belief system of Christianity, right? Like, it was the Christianity that got these people to do what they did to save the rest of us. Right, Pastor? Ain't that your argument? But let's see here. Let's talk about African agency real quick. Let's have some fun. See, the African as a critical agent in the transmission of religious ideas and practices is what Sani and others have described as the African factor. When Berber Muslims appeared around the upper Niger banks in the 8th century AD, these Abadi Muslim merchants kept their fate to themselves, thus practicing what Ryan calls self-imposed mercantile quarantine. It was not until after the 11th century that Islamic practices began to adapt to the local customs. When al-Bukhari, the 11th century Spanish geographer, wrote on non-Muslim communities in ancient Ghana practicing their religions, he described their practices as el-Masuya, Maganism, Majazinism, or whatever, however you say that, and simply in conflict with Allah or Shirk, polytheism. The appearance of the Europeans, the Portuguese Catholics of Elmina Castle, and the Dans between the 15th and the 16th centuries was also marked by a period of segregation. During this time, European religious people separated themselves from local people. When their Christianity began to influence the conversion of others, it reached the mulatto or mixed race Africans along the coast. The European traders were not missionaries. Their religion was incidental to their interest in gold, ivory, land, and slaves. And as the De Bronner points out, Christianity was a bedfellow with the slave trade between the 15th and 18th centuries, and this fact overshadowed any genuine, if meager, effort to missionize, intending to elicit a positive response from the local people. Post-colonial literature often gives the impression that Africans began to assert their agency after the 1960s when nations south of the Sahara gained their independence. However, Africanization did not start after the 1960s when nations were celebrating their independence. Religious and cultural interactions that stressed African agency preceded independence. In fact, the Africans as a responsible and creative agent has functioned during such religious interactions since before foreign religions arrived in West Africa. Sinai highlights the African factor in missions in his book of West African Christianity. By the African factor, he refers to the significance of the response of African religions to foreign religions that have been brought to Africa, such as foreign religions that have been brought to Africa, such as Christianity and Islam. These are Africans telling us that Islam and Christianity is foreign to the continent. It is in the light of African religious models and African agency, he argues, that the effective transmission of foreign religions can take place. He contends that when the African factor is given its due focus, it allows us to assess the respective impact of Christianity and Islam through the eyes of African religions and release these two missionary faiths from the fixed, motionless time frame in which they have been frozen. He clarifies his argument with reference to the apparent failure of missions between 1480 and 1785, and a successful period between 1785 and 1885, when Africans became equipped to engage in the missions. The foreign religions began to spread. See, the focus of the African agency helps us to understand how Africans construct connections under the pressures of time and space. It also lays emphasis on addressing the cultural production of devotee religious knowledge and the people's ability to change ideas and practices. As Sinai discusses religious encounters among African religions, Christianity and Islam, his stress on the factor seems to lead him to a little heavier-handed in stating that the African response reveals African religious heritage, which is brought to bear on the interreligious encounter. Much of this African heritage is crucial. It is also important to mention that the agency is shown when the African uses the models of a foreign religion to articulate aspects of his or her own religion. Listen to me. The privilege Africans gave America was just summed up. And I'm going to say it again. Much as this African heritage is crucial, it is also important to mention that agency is shown when the African uses the models of a foreign religion to articulate aspects of his or her own religion. Furthermore, indigenous religions did and do sometimes use foreign religious models to renew themselves, or the foreign religion to spread further. War medicines from shrines such as the Croquis Dente were imported from the northern region of present-day Ghana to the Ashanti region to aid Ashanti warriors during the Ashanti Wars of Expansion. During the period of the Ashanti expansion, Mande people and others who practiced Islam at the trade centers in Western Sudan came under Ashanti control. Kwakadudua was thus an ambivalent patron of Islam. Such strategic use of religion was not peculiar to the king. Ashanti political, culture, and military power was bolstered through the incorporation of religions of some of the people they conquered. It was during the Osi Tutu Kwame's reign, 1804 to 1823, in Ashanti that Muslim gained stronghold in Kumasi and the Ashanti capital. Dubious quotes Osi Kwame as saying, "The Quran is strong, and I like it because it is the book of the great God. It does good for me, and therefore I love all the people that read it." Osi Kwame consulted Muslims for prayers, and some Muslims held responsible positions in the king's court. Here's where they get you. The widespread use of amulets and talisman were not restricted to the common people in Ashanti. The Ashanti war captains, the king himself, and other warriors all had battle garb, on which were sewn bulletproof amulets made by Muslims. That's where they get you. You were familiar with amulets because you went into the forest with those amulets on, and Muslims began to present their own amulets in a way that you would inherit that and says, hey, I can adapt that, right? Okay. As Dupuis reports, the Ashanti accept aspects of Islam, believing that the Quran was a divine creation and consequently that it contained ordinances and prohibitions which were most congenial to the happiness of mankind in general. The appeal of Islam was not necessarily the faith itself, but rather the efficacy of the religion, as it enabled the Ashanti to order their lives in relation to success, victory in battle, healing, and so on. Later, Ashanti and Kromo, Ashanti Muslims, who consisted of both Ashanti and non-Ashanti, came into being. The Ashanti king Kwakadua accepted certain aspects of Islam in Kamasi, but did not convert. He didn't convert. See, conversion would have entailed his being circumcised, but this was impossible as an Ashanti king could not have any physical blemish, including circumcision. I'm gonna slow that down for y'all again, because some of y'all didn't know that. The Ashanti king Kwakidua accepted certain aspects of Islam in Kamasi, but did not convert. Conversion would have entailed his being circumcised, but this was impossible as an Ashanti king could not have any physical blemish, including circumcision. Circumcision would have spelled his overthrow. Between 1879 and 1895, Christian missionaries encountered Muslims in Nigerian cities such as Abeokuta and Lagos. They appeared to have admired a religion which taught sobriety, personal discipline, and lay participation, in which inspired self-giving and enforced a moral code. At the same time, while Christianity, especially Protestantism, saw local languages as essential to the spread of religion, Islamists insisted on Arabic and exclusive vehicle revelation. The use of sacred language as a means of communication also has its appeal. Even those who do not understand Arabic can have respect and reverence for the language. So here's the renewal of religion coming. Conventional wisdom underscored by social evolutionary thought tends to suppose that in the light of social and religious change, practitioners and indigenous religions would discard their religions and embrace immigrant religions like Christianity and Islam. What does the word immigrant mean? Because he said there's immigrant religions, Christianity and Islam, that if West Africans borrowed from the immigrant religions, they were bound to privilege.
So he pretty much telling you they foreign. They foreign.
Yeah.
They foreign to Africa. They're immigrants. They're not of African origin.
No. But this is what he says, that if West Africans borrowed from immigrant religions, they were bound to privilege the new religions, so the indigenization would lead to African Islam and Christianity rather than Christianized or Islamized indigenous religions. See, the African thought that they were entitled to something if they converted. What did they use? Trade was empirical in this moment, because you're talking about being able to trade with people that you didn't have to trade with before, and that would enrich you in this trade. And they telling us off the cusp that, man, look, man, we thought that we could be, that we could get involved in the business of the people, these foreign people, these immigrants that are in our land. We thought that we could do business with them. He goes on to say, Santa Marifo and Santa Nofo of Elmina are examples of indigenous religions that co-opted aspects of foreign religions to start new indigenous religions with a new priesthood structure. See, after Christianity arrived in West Africa in the 15th century, I'm going to say it again. After, listen to me, Pastor Bennett, listen to me real slow. And the other dudes, listen to me real slow. after Christianity arrived in West Africa in the 15th century, accounts of travelers such as Richard Jobson and a Portuguese Jesuit priest named Balthasar Barrera recorded ways in which Africans had combined elements of indigenous African religions with Islam and Christianity. For instance, writing in the 1620s, Jobson reports that Muslims in Senegambia had used the cross to decorate their dresses and houses and had deployed the name of Jesus as a charm. Beret is said to have found traditional rulers such as Susu, king of Sierra Leone, embracing Islam and rejecting Christianity. At other times, religious tolerance had fostered a particular religion, though the person in power might belong to a different or competing religious tradition. Now, here comes the encounter between indigenous religions and Islam. I'm not even, you know what? I'm not even gonna get into to that part. I'm not gonna get into that part. I'm sticking to the pastor. Because I'm gonna bring it around, right? Because I just ain't gonna let one off. I'm going in because I'm gonna show you the gift. I'm showing y'all the gift. When I say gift, I mean privilege that Africans gave America. You ain't gotta, you know, you can argue against it all you want to, but I'm showing you the privilege that Africans gave America. Because we Africanized their religion that was foreign to us and incorporated it in a way that we got people standing in front of an audience and telling people that we was already Christians. And that we got all the things that we got because of Christianity. Not because of you or people, but because a religion influenced you to do good by your people. Correct me where I'm wrong. I don't mind correction. But let me continue. De Bronner writes, what remained as Catholicism at Elmina at 160 to 170 years of Portuguese rule, a pagan shrine, said to contain the statue of Saint Anthony and present certain Christian features, and it is quite possible that some elements of Catholicism were thus observed into the pagan religion. Frisch Murray and Marat reported in 1818 that they had found relics of the Virgin Mary and Saint Anthony of Padua in pagan homes in Elmina. The two Catholic priests also observed that the Elminians who possessed the relics of Mary called themselves Santa Marifo. As they performed certain rituals on Fridays, the Santa Marifo repeated the phrases that contained the words Santa Maria. The devotees wore long robes and carried candles as they processed through the major streets of Elmina. See, during the 16th and 17th centuries, Portuguese Catholic presence in West Africa, the church held big processions during the statues and saints were decorated and carried around. Among the statues were those of Virgin Mary, called in Portuguese Miranda de Santa Maria. Wilkin further suggests that the Portuguese era, before the Portuguese were driven out by the Dutch in 1637, the African Christians in Elmina who carried the statues in the processions had to keep them until the next celebration. Thus, when the Dutch took over, the Elminians kept the relics of the saints and passed them on from one generation to another until the 1880s, when the Society of African Missions, SMA, sent Fresh Moreau and Morant to West Africa. By then, the relics of the saints had become important ritual objects in the custody of Africans who had inherited ritual power from their forebears. Oh, so we're going to leave y'all this, and y'all going to be able to continue to do what you need to do, see? That's what y'all going to do, right? You see what's going on? It's a game being played right now, yo. They're playing the game right now. we sitting over here and we listening to a pastor tell us that it was Christianity that did all these things. Christianity. That's all I kept saying. We came over here, we was already Christian. And then you got people over here saying, brother, we were not. They were still Christianizing us as we came over there. People who were Christians, right? People who were Christians were converted, right? They were planting the seeds early. So we're dealing with altered roles and identities. See, mention should be made of identities and roles that have changed as a result of interactions between religions in the same community. For instance, the Hausa language of traders from Nigeria and other parts of northern Ghana has been worked into Quranic recitals and prayers of Islamic schools. With the state formation around some of the places that use the Asafalasa societies, indigenous land priests have lost some of their influence and prestige. For example, we can look to the Digat, who among the Mandingo were called master of the land. In their society, the status of many members changed with the emergence of new political institutions and leadership. Chiefs and kings, with their new political authorities, subordinated priests. Hence, the latter played only a ritual role and are no longer viewed as the custodians of the land. With the emergence of chieftaincy among the Ladoga of northern Ghana, however, the Talisi, remember we talked about the Talisi, and the Tadini share complementary roles in the political ritual domain. Thus, under conditions of social change, the status of indigenous religion specialists sometimes increased or decreased, and at other times coexisted with other leaders in the community. So the African began to live among the Arab, live among the Christian, and coexist because there was some kind of benefit. Trade was still prevalent. We got to get our hands on something. So what I'm trying to tell you, before all of the belief, it was the people. It has always been the people. We Africanized Christianity. We Africanized Islam. We did these things. See, the discussion has sought to shed light on ways in which religious interactions do not always produce hybridized forms of the privileged immigrant religions. Remember, we're calling them immigrant religions. Indigenous African religions did and continue to undergo changes that are articulated in new religious practice, concepts, and roles. In pre-colonial West Africa, the non-African religions were Islam. In pre-colonial West Africa, the non-African religions were Islam and Christianity, which brought their personal values, institutions, faith, and practices to missionize Africans. As African indigenous religions spread, they borrowed from other resident religions and from those immigrant religions, which in turn were themselves missionized at times. In other cases, indigenous African religious ways of life were borrowed by Islam and Christianity to missionize Africans. Also, during such religious, cultural, and social encounters, new religions and religious institutions and offices emerged that did not exist prior to the interactions. The religious and social constructs of reconceptualization of deities and their power that occurred to address people's needs, part of the cultural and political reformulations that have been critical to the religious history of West Africa. Hold on one second, my people. One minute. Because we get into the good part. Now, remember, that was out of a book I couldn't share. But I gave you the title, the chapter, and the pages. I'm going to put it on the screen. It's the book. Themes in West Africa History. So, when you get Africans writing from an African perspective, you start to uncover a little bit more information than you do when you subside to the African American worldview. And that's part of the issue that we have when we're dealing with religious people, of the belief that Christianity just did everything for the black man in America. Like, we couldn't do shit without Christianity. Are you serious? So I just ain't gonna play it one way and not play it the other way, right? Because see, I'm not a biased researcher. I ain't biased like everybody else. I ain't gonna read it one way. I'm coming from both ways. But I'm gonna show you how good the people was. But I'm going to also show you how they put the religious part of the people first, and then the accomplishments that came behind the people. See, I did it today on a Facebook post. I put up a post about a black nationalist, right? This brother was a slave, right? He was enslaved in Mississippi. He fights in the war in Chattanooga. He goes to Texas. He leaves there to come to Nashville. He comes to Nashville with the inspiration of being able to show black people how to do for self. He wanted to start a publishing company because he wanted black people to write their own books, publish their own books, own their own businesses, teach their own kids, to do all of that in Nashville, Tennessee. Mr. Boyd. But they tell you what he is. But they tell you what he is first. And if you've seen it, the post, if you haven't seen the post, I'm just going to tell you what it say. It says, Richard Boyd, preacher, missionary, entrepreneur, publisher, banker, educator, writer, and black nationalist. And black nationalist, right? So he was all of those things. So here we go. FS Cherry, boy, you crazy. Let me share my screen. This is the privilege that Africans gave America. The Negro. Here you go. In every significant chapter of Tennessee's history, black men and women have played important roles. Yet few of the many books published on Tennessee's history attributed significant roles to the state's African American citizens. Except for chapters on slavery, the aftermath of slavery, and civil rights. These books, written by most European American authors, generally ignore social and cultural African American history in Tennessee. Therefore, the majority of history books on Tennessee are inadequate and incomplete for the full study of the state's rich history and culture, because in the 19th century, African Americans comprised fully a quarter of Tennessee's citizens, which should mean that they would be included in at least 25% of the state's history. This is not the case in Tennessee. In particular, early black history is sorely lacking. Not until the 20th century were real attempts made to complete studies on Tennessee's African American history. Caleb Patterson published his thesis, The Negro in Tennessee, in 1780 to 1865, and Chase Mooney of Vanderbilt published his master's thesis and PhD dissertation into a book entitled Slavery in Tennessee. Although these studies by white graduate students contributed greatly to the study of Tennessee black population, the books focused on blacks as a mere workers and objects. Precisely because of this national problem, black historians Carter G. Woodson, the second black American to receive a PhD in history, joined with other concerned Black leaders in Washington, D.C. to form an association for the study of Negro life and the history incorporated. This is where you get the what I talked about the other day, right? The American Negro Academy. You get things like that. You get these study and focus groups. They start to evolve and challenge white academia. So they're trying to write themselves into history. This giving you a piece of that. And this is just about Tennessee. During the period of 1916 through 1941, the American Black History Movement began as African Americans increased their understanding of race, culture, and the idea of Blackness. For instance, in 1916, the ASNLH began publication of its quarterly journal of Negro history. In 1929, the graduate students and social science professors at Fisk University and other Black colleges began interviewing from slaves through their federal work Progress Administration Project. These interviews began the slave narratives, which eventually was published in several volumes by Greenwood Press of Westport, Connecticut. The Slave Narratives, Volume 19 for Tennessee, gave different Black perspectives of slavery. The former slaves saw themselves differently than the white historians who previously presented a sterilized story. They especially would make no judgments about fellow white men and women who perpetrated the evil institutions of human bondage. The Fisk slave narratives were entitled God Struck Me Dead, Unwritten Stories of Slavery in 1941. Despite the existence of the Black narratives of the slave states, including Tennessee, still there were no scholarly study on African Americans in Tennessee history by Blacks. Between 1929 and 1941, however, Tennessee's study for the Black perspective was researched and published by Fisk University's dean and historian Alrutheus Ambush Taylor. He and other local Black historians came under the influence of Carter G. Woodson, who spoke in Nashville on several occasions. Taylor titled his study The Negro in Tennessee. Taylor's book not only complemented the one by Patterson, but the study went beyond slavery and recovered Reconstruction history as various aspects of Black life, including business and politics. See, Taylor's classic was published and distributed by the Associated Publishers and affiliated to the ASNLH. Also, as a result of the ASNLH's influence, Professor Merle Epsey of Tennessee Agricultural Institute State College published his book, The Negro, II in American History. With the introduction of graduate studies of Fisk University in Tennessee and A&I, which is TSU, all right, many master's theses appeared. These small studies, which are available at the institution's libraries, encourage more writers about Tennessee Black history, including theses and dissertations at white colleges and universities. The civil rights movement of the 60s produced a demand for scholarly studies and books on Black Americans, causing white historians to enter the market for such books. After a Black professor of history, Tennessee State University, Mingo Scott published his Blacks in Tennessee, Government and Politics, two white professionals published their doctoral dissertations, The Triumph of Jim Crow, Tennessee Race Relations in the 1880s, by Joseph Cartwright and the Black Tennesseans. All right, both authors attempted to take the Tennessee's Black story a few chapters beyond A.A. Taylor's 1880 stopping point. In 1978, you had Bobby Lovett's PhD dissertation, The Negro in Tennessee, A Social Military History of the Civil War Era, appeared as a paperback and a hardback by University Microfilm International in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and addressed the neglected history of Black Tennesseans during the Civil War period. Lovett, a Tennessee State University history professor, concentrated on the Civil War period because it was a chapter of Tennessee's history that had been purposely distorted by white Southern historians. See, Lovett's dissertation was preceded by the scholarly article, The Negro Civil War in Tennessee, 1861-1865, which was published in the ASNLH's Journal of Negro History. Then in 1981, under the auspices of the Tennessee Historical Commission, Lester C. Lehman attempted to bring synthesis to the Black story in Tennessee by publishing a small book, Blacks in Tennessee, 1791 to 1970. In 1985, John Semprich publishes a doctoral dissertation, Slavery Ends in Tennessee, 1861, 1865. Other books and scholarly articles by blacks and whites follow until an extensive picture of African-American history in Tennessee was generally clear by 1995. See, more than 100 years passed after neo-Confederate writers took control of the state's history, causing black history to become lost, stolen, or strayed. To quote actor Bill Cosby from Tennessee's history books, in their zeal to cleanse the evil chapter of the Confederacy and redeem the Confederate ancestors, many white writers contributed to the consciously and unconsciously significance of the distortion of Tennessee's history. They painted a colored canvas using one color, white, to sterilize slavery and glorify the Confederacy. Now they made it this far, and we ain't said nothing about the black church. We talked about the Negro. In an initial post that I put up on Facebook, I dealt with the Negro. I said on Tuesday that I was in a barbershop, right? And I posted a picture. Out of our deepest need, we have built the Negro church. I put that up on Tuesday. So here we are, we going this far. And it's funny because in the second paragraph here, you'll see a very familiar name. Historical documentations, including Ivan Van Sertima's work, shows up. We talking about Tennessee history right now. And Sertima shows up. But it goes on. Like what I'm getting at is that Africa, man, y'all ain't feeling me, man. I know Unc in the building. What up, Unc? Real quick, I just want to say this real quick, that the privilege, we are the privilege. We gave them that. We ain't the privilege. We are the example of that. Like the privilege Africans gave America is everything that we built on. It was not we were just Christian and we made the progression. It was the Negro who drove. But hold on, because I know, I know you might want to say something about this, but you know, I'm kind of slick, like throwing some shots at Pastor Bennett right now. I said it a couple of times, but I want to get into this whole notion of this black church notion, because it was the Negro before a black church. Because it was Negroes doing stuff before a black church existed. They were running away. They were, you know, doing things that they needed to do to free people. They were exercising their rights to be as humane as possible before a black church. But for some apparent reason, we get a guy that shows up on Dagger Squad, and the first thing that he want to say, the black church is this, and this, and then he wants to hide behind the scholarship of our brothers over there on a whole nother channel that's teaching people about the amazing things that people did. They just so happen to be of a religious narrative. But that ain't the initial drive that's driving these people to do the things that they were doing. And but we're sitting here and we're insinuating these things. So through all of just dealing with Tennessee history, right? Because you got to deal with some parts of this to get to where you're going in other aspects of it. I'm in a Bible Belt, so I'm only dealing with what I'm dealing with. But I knew what they were already trying to do when Pastor got up there and started saying this spiel, and then saying, "Well, you can't get mad at W.B. Du Bois said," and so he go to Bois, right? He go to Bois in his Black Religion article, right? Here's Du Bois, right? In the Negro Church. We got it right here too. We got it right here too. We can deal with it. But you just being disingenuous, Pastor. When you come on here insinuating that, man, these people made this progress because they was in the church. What up, Unc? What's good?
What's up, yo?
Hey, man, you know, I'm just sending out little small flares here and there.
Just giving out some black love. I hear you. Yeah. Hey, man, so maybe they thought we had a lot of choices or some shit like that.
Correct. Right.
You feel me? We didn't have a whole lot of choices, man. That's real. We did not have a lot of choices. Yo. The black church was the only game in town. What else was you gonna do? So I don't know. I wouldn't. If they'd had mosques, we did the same thing.
Right.
If they'd had African temples, we probably would have did it better. You feel me? So
Now what I'm saying.
figure me out. And I've been to church. You been to church, Sean?
Yeah, I done been to church, man. I was raised.
Most people don't believe it like that anyway. Let's really get it. Let's really get it cracking. I've been to church. Homeboys, we all go to church because our mothers made us go. And I promise you, little kids, teenagers, they don't be believing it like that, yo. Then you got to separate the people that then did all kinds of stuff growing up, and then they get older, then they go to the church. Okay? So it ain't like it was the church. You know what I'm saying? The church was the only game in town. They had buildings, man. So I ain't giving it that credit. Like, come on, man. Black people will have the fighting spirit against oppression, no matter what religion they practice. Whether they atheists, you know what I'm saying? What particular religion did the Black Panthers have? Did they have any particular religion? Someone was Muslims, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so it ain't come on, yo, it ain't like Christ came down, you'll decide to help black people. That's the real point, because yo could have just did that before we even left Africa. So we know it wasn't Christ. You gotta say Christ. That's how you gotta say Christ. No, it wasn't that. It was the people in the daggone church. It never was God. It never was Jesus. It was always the people in the daggone church. So, I mean, I just be trying to say people feelings at times, yo, but the reality situation is, yo, that's it. Because, I mean, come on, dog. Like, now you're going to help me. It would have been easier to help me fight in Africa on home turf. It would have been more simpler. Throw some sand in their eyes so we can run, break away. While we in Africa, we can, you know what I'm saying? Nah, now you're going to help us. Now that we're in America, now you're going to help us. Whatever, man. So, look. All right, they play that game, yo. Nope, it's always the human being, man. Never forget that. It's the human being to build the church. It's the human being. So, I don't be tripping. I'll just be laughing. Yeah. Yeah, we get on their heads though, man, because the reality is reality. It's Black History Month, man. So stop taking black people out of it. That's just how I feel, bro.
Right. So let me say this real quick, and then let me put this on the screen real quick, because this takes us right into this whole thing with Christianity in the way that Pastor Bennett like to swing it, right? So I'm gonna go over here to this paragraph. I'm gonna start here. I'm gonna start right here. So basically, the paragraph above is talking about events that transpired during, like Christmas, as you can see here in the words, and how blacks entertain themselves. So you see, they had theater, dancing, circuses, cockfights, horse races. They had black musicians and things of that nature. So they kept themselves busy year round when they had to do what they needed to do. All right. So in the next paragraph after that, when they talk about some prominent people in Nashville history and surrounding counties like Hickman, Dixon, if you're familiar with Nashville, you know how close they are. You talk about prominent people like J.C. Napier, right? Has a projects named after him. You got a few other prominent people, and that project is on the south side, on my side of town. So it says antebellum blacks also maintain churches. We done got all the way down here, and then we finally introduced churches. These institutions were controlled by white, I'm going to say this slowly, antebellum blacks also maintained churches. These institutions were controlled by white congregations, mostly in towns and cities like Columbia, Knoxville, Memphis, and Nashville. Slave Christians existed throughout slavery and enjoyed the privileges of baptism, official membership, the Lord's Supper with white members. They also experienced excommunication. And then there was the invisible black church. Services was operated by black slave preachers like Dick Ham in clandestine places like Nashville's Buck Alley to gather their flock and watch for slave patrols. The members of the invisible black churches used singing codes such as lyrics as "Steal Away to Jesus," announcements of weevils in the wheat, warned against white knowledge of any impeding meeting, and raid foxes were designated among swift young runners to decoy white patrollers away from the sacred brush arbors. So just in that paragraph right there, right? The whites controlled the church, but black people decided to do something differently with the church when they needed to do what they needed to do to get people out of their situation. So these are oppressed people, knowing that they're enslaved and under the jurisdiction of whites when they had to talk church. But when they needed to talk business, they utilized the tools that are around them, what Unc just said, in order to handle their business. They spoke in code. They used these songs. You know, they hinted at certain things. They met certain places, right? They were looking out for the people. So it goes on, and then it says slave religion became formalized during the 1830s when the Southern churches began an evangelical movement to Christianize more slaves and their owners. This was an effort to counter the Northern abolitionist arguments that slavery was evil, unchristian, should be abolished immediately. Now, most slaveholders were not church members, and generally they were crude and uncultured men who forbade slaves to gather for any meetings, including church services. More than a few slaveholders fornicated with their enslaved workers, committed adultery against their white wives, raped and abused black women, enslaved children, reared their white children with their illegitimate black siblings, and sold their own mulatto children and grandchildren. As a result of the Southern evangelical movement, by the 1840s, some Baptist and Methodist churches included many slaveholders and had more black member slaves than white ones. And that gives you a rundown of all the black churches. So it gets back to that point, man, that it was people. You know, look at what's going on with them, man. They didn't even want them in the church, yo. They didn't want them in the church. They didn't want you congregating at all because they knew what you was getting ready to do. This tells the story where I'm from. Now, the story might be different where you from. Where I'm from, this tells our story. And I wanted to put that on the screen. Sutek, what you drop in the chat, bro?
Article on Christianity and African American community, showing how basically it was used, Christianity was used to justify slavery, but you know, African Americans turned it around and used it as momentum to get their freedom.
Like they always do. Like we always do. Like we'll take the word nigga and make it mean something else, right?
Right. This, Christians like to use that, like, okay, well, we use Christianity for such and such and so and so, but the reality is, man, it was just a situation of circumstance. It don't matter what the religion. If America was an Islamic nation, then we would have did the same shit with Islam. Like it's no big ups to Christianity. We just used what was available. We was in a Christian nation, so that's what we had available to us. We couldn't practice our own, so you know we made do with what we had, and we cherry picked picked and choose like Christians still do yet today. You know what I'm saying? Like it's no big ups to Christianity. We just used what we had. We could have had Islam, we could have had Hinduism. It would have been the same situation. We would have used it for whatever we could have used it for. Like, you know what I'm saying? It's no Christianity wasn't fucking with us. You know what I mean? It wasn't like that was our shit.
Mm-hmm. I feel you. I feel you. I just find it quite interesting that that people this whole notion that it was Christianity, you know, that our ancestors was Christians and they did this, and this. Man, they was Christian because it was forced upon them, and it was the only, like Uncle just said, is the only game in town, and it was the only tool that they actually had. And I just showed you that it was the only tool that they actually had by talking about what I just talked about in that last thing that I read when I said antebellum blacks also maintained churches. And they had white overseers. So now we just gonna disregard the overseers, right? We know the overseers is there for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
They were eavesdropping and making sure that the right words was being taught. It says in many antebellum churches in West Tennessee, the whites feared the great numbers of slaves. Most masters preferred to keep the blacks in integrated congregations, often seating the blacks in newly constructed balconies and rear pews. Many slave masters began to encourage preachers to speak to their slaves, often to make the blacks more obedient. Both slave and free black preachers included Daniel H. Jones Pompey, Edmund Kelly, and Nelson G. Mary became notable speakers among Tennessee's antebellum black Christians. And then it goes on to talk about other people. See, this is where that tool is being used, because they putting the blackface in front of the people and they telling them that, hey, look, keep your people cool. And then you get this separation. This is where you pretty much get classes too. You get different, you know what I'm saying? You get the have and the have-nots pretty much, because preachers had more privilege than a common person in these earlier times. Because it was, you know, they pretty much was rewarded for kicking this stuff. It said the Civil War brought to an end the spiritual enslavement of black Christians by white Christians who worshiped the degenerated Southern religion, New Testament theology, Southern nationalism, regionalism, and racism. The black churches gained their independence during and after the war and took various names. So now they start changing the names of the churches. But after the Civil War. See, we just ain't giving people no credit, because now the emphasis is on the church, the black church. They done did everything. It been relevant in all American history. We was already Christians. Man, I want to play that video so bad just so I can laugh.
Hey, you said they had their mans in there to make sure what was said need to be said and what wasn't said didn't get said, right? So, like when something happened in the black community, say like police shoot one of us down, etc. The first motherfucker they throw up on TV is your pastors. Nobody ain't get that. Like Reverend Al Sharpton, they put Reverend Al Sharpton ass up there every time something happened. He the first face from the black community on the news. So they still the game is Jesse Jackson too. The game is still going. They still got their mans in there. I don't want to hear from when somebody's shooting down our youth in the street. I don't want to hear from no goddamn pastor. Go ahead.
We did in the street. Yeah, pastor come up and talking about kumbaya, my Lord. Trying to rile us up. What? And notice what I said, because I said it in here. I said it when I just read it that they would tell the black pastors to keep everybody cool. See, so when they kill us, what they send the black pastor to do is keep everybody cool. What you just said, right? It ain't stopped then, and it's still continuing today. So let's talk about W.B. Du Bois real quick. Let's deal with that. I was gonna get into the rare alliance of African American and white women because they used the African American women in Tennessee to actually help the white women do what they need to do regarding voting. I was gonna do a nice little build on this, but I ain't wanna bore everybody with that, man, because y'all don't believe that they use y'all. So let's deal with Du Bois right here. He says Du Bois on Black religion. What is most common striking about Du Bois' 1898 annual article, The Study of the Negro Problem, is how little attention he devotes to the Black religion and the Black church as lays out his brief research agenda. He did include among his defining social characteristics of Black people the fact that they were members of Christian churches. He also suggested that historical studies of enslaved Americans include attention to their conversion to Christianity, which he saw as part of the social evolution which separated them from their savage ancestors. It was in his call for historical study that he placed the rise of such peculiar expressions of Negro social history as the Negro church. So again, his interest in the church was historical in this piece and not statistical or anthropolitical or sociological, the other three broad areas of study outlined. It is somewhat ironic that as Du Bois envisioned his research project, then the church of his own day did not figure in it, even as it would become somewhat more prominent in the actual study published a year later in the study, The Philadelphian Negro. Du Bois characterized the organized church as a curious phenomenon. Hold on, I just lost my place. All right. Curious phenomenon that represented all that was left of the African tribal life and that blended both family and ritual functions in all-encompassing way. So far-reaching as these functions of the church, he concluded that its organizations is almost political. Elsewhere in this same study, Du Bois cast the church first as a social institution, then as a religious institution. Because of their unique position as Black institutions, Du Bois concluded that all movements for social betterment are apt to center in the churches, where the race problem in all its phases is continually being discussed. Yet his praise of the church rang faintly, as he ended by chiding churches for what he saw as the distractions of extravagance and internal decision, which spoiled their greater political, I missed the last word, potential. My bad, I said political. Now, in an essay written a year later and subsequently published as the chapter in the Souls of Black Folk, Du Bois reaffirmed the prominence of the church in the Black life, but was more openly critical of the passivity implicate in Christian doctrine. Now, he judged that its principles were well suited to the slaves, but unsustainable for contemporary political and social needs, which is his view, were being ignored by the Black Methodists and Black churches with their emphasis on religious feeling and fever. When Du Bois published his Atlanta University study, The Negro Church, in 1903, his frustration was more apparent in a statement in which he joined Mary Church Terrell and sociologist Kelly Miller, called for a religious rebirth for Black people, one that would move the church away from emotional fever toward becoming a mighty social power and the most powerful agency in the moral development and social reform of 9 million Americans of Negro blood. So even in his article, when he's arguing, right? Why wasn't this brought to people's attention, Pastor Bennett, when you was talking about and bringing up Du Bois and saying that he's giving these praises to the church and all these old things? Why didn't you say that he actually had some contentions with the actual church and he wanted to get Black people away from being having this religious fever, as he said, religious feeling and fever, right? He wanted to be more socially organized. Wanted the church to be more socially organized in order to get stuff done. But because you wanted to have this feeling and this fever, you can't get nothing done because you're stuck in trying to catch the Holy Ghost, said Sunday, instead of actually trying to put yourself to work to actually resolve issues. Okay, they don't want to get into that. So despite Du Bois' poignant embrace of the power of Black spirituals and the souls of Black folk, he also reasserted this sense of failed potential in the Black church leadership. So there was a failed potential leadership there in the Black church, even as he continued to accept the significance of the church in Black communities. In editorials written The Crisis in the decade to follow, Du Bois continued this pattern of praising the Black church, but harshly criticizing its leadership for being pretentious, dishonest, and immoral, for failing to address real economic needs of its members, and for driving away educated and energetic Black men and women who do not subscribe to unimportant dogmas and ancient and outward creeds. Pastor Bennett, why you didn't say this? Why you didn't bring up that Du Bois actually had a problem with the Black church? Because he thought that it would be better used and more suitable to actually move Black people forward by organizing and creating an agenda that would bring us into a competitive state. We're already 300 and something years behind, 400 years behind our enslavers. We're going through these eras, Reconstruction, right? We fighting for all these liberties, but here it goes. He calls the Black church information, unimportant dogmas, and ancient and outworn creeds. So why was this not in it, man? You only gave us the good things that he said about the Black church in your presentation. And this is why I say I have a problem with the Black church, because it's fake. No matter what, you can stand out on every corner with a bullhorn and talk about somebody getting shot and killed. But and you can pump fake us with the fake faith without actions, without work is dead, or whatever, however y'all say that. But on the real, it's the people. It ain't the church. He praised the people, not the church, because the church wasn't moving, and it ain't moved. It's stuck. The same problems Du Bois is discussing right here in this is the same problems we still have with the Black church today. Y'all caught up in unimportant dogmas that are ancient and outworn creeds. And I don't know if you can get Apostle on here, but Apostle said on your show when we had him on here the first time that we had him on the show on the pseudo killers, before the last time he was on there, he said he wished he used the church to teach them economics and all the other things that they could utilize outside the church that would help them be in better position to move forward. So let's continue. African Americans' thoughts on Black religion and churches. Although this critique may seem all too familiar, it is valuable to be reminded that the church was viewed at the beginning of the 20th century not as a powerfully engaged political actor, but rather an aged, sleeping giant squandering its potential. And Du Bois was by no means alone in this assessment. When Carter G. Woodson first published The History of the Negro Church in 1921, a book which to date has no rival as a claimed history of Black church, he echoed many of these same criticisms in his narrative historical account. Woodson now diagnosed the church as suffering not only from a generational divide, a class divide, and a regional one, but ultimately from a division over differences in ideas about the importance of the church in the life of the community. Indeed, for Woodson, rather than being an ununified force for the Black people, the church had become its primary defensive force, splitting the Black community into conservatives who embraced the old-time religion in style and doctrine, and progressives who wanted both religion and education and a more modern style of worship and theology, divisions which themselves mirrored larger political differences. At the same time, he did credit the church with doing some good and deflected some of the criticism of the Black church onto white Christianity, which he characterized as not interested in the real mission of Christ, adding as an aside that Jesus would be lynched if he were on the scene. Still, like Du Bois, Woodson did not, or perhaps could not, advocate for an absolute dismissal of the church life, but rather argued for its reform from within. In this way, he too conceded the enduring staying power of the Black churches and preachers, but urged that they embrace the things of this world, promoting education, health, recreation, social welfare. But on the specific questions of Black preachers' involvement in the political activity, Woodson cautioned that the preachers have done their best political work by protest from outside the machine. The criticisms of the Black church Du Bois and Woodson outlined in these earlier works were voiced by others as well. For example, Kelly Miller, in 1914 article on the ministry, argued boldly that Du Bois' so-called talented tenth of the race ought to simply take over the leadership of the Black churches. The talented tenth should take over, you say. Interesting. Now, pleading that otherwise, if the blind lead the blind, will not both fall into the ditch. More explicitly, he suggested that the talented ought to simply flood into the ministry itself and assume the leadership of Black religious institutions in life. Black women writers and activists in this period attributed some of the disappointment about the Black church, specifically to ministerial dominations of the church policy. Ida B. Wells and Fannie Williams, for example, were among many Black women activists who described Black preachers as corrupt and ignorant, with Williams arguing that Black advancement was more hindered by the ministerial leadership than by any other single cause. I remember he brought up Ida B. Wells too, y'all. See, indeed, Wells had left the church in disgust when a bishop failed to remove a minister who had been implicated in a moral scandal. Wells' more pointed general criticism, however, was that some Black preachers were too timid politically, based on her experience trying to organize protest meetings about lynchings. For example, in the aftermath of 1908 lynching in Springfield, Illinois, Wells could not convince her own church or any other in Chicago to allow her to hold a public meeting about it. That actually led her to use her own home instead as a site for a series of meetings on that other political issues. Even as Wells aimed her criticism directly at political timidity of ministerial leadership, some other Black women observers shared, along with their male counterparts, an abhorrence for traditional Black religious practices that were in eyes unrefined and too emotionally charged. Anne Julie Cooper called that style of worship ludicrous and semi-civilized. For Mary Church Terrell and Alice Dunbar Nelson, expression of religious fever by Black women were especially distasteful and frightful to some extent, with Terrell calling it discouraging and shocking to see how some of the women shout, holler, and dance during service. Dunbar Nelson chided those who participated for reinforcing negative images of Black women in particular as primitive and thought unstated, as highly eroticized as well. Here and in the writings of men like Du Bois, Woodson, and others in this period, one sees quite clearly the interracial class bias implicit in these critiques of Black worship practices. Black religiousity itself had become a central class marker intertwined with notions about working class, rural Southerners, or their recently migrated northern urban kin. Nevertheless, Evelyn Higginbotham cautions that many Black Baptist women who objected to emotionalism of Black worship practices were not rejected the practices themselves, as some of them also engaged in similar expressions during worship services. Rather, Higginbotham concluded they were objective to an excessive reliance on emotionalism in the absence of meaningful social program. Back to social programs. Nanny Barrows, the activist found at the Women's Convention of the National Baptist Convention, argued that the church should not substitute shouting for service, as she chastised the Black clergy for preaching too much heaven and too little practical Christian living. Black women's criticism of ministers were often twofold, then aimed both at what they saw as their lack of moral and intellectual leadership and their political conservatism. Burroughs and the Black Baptist women had in their minds a model of Black churches' public responsibilities that shared some philosophical similarities to the settlement house, social gospels, and other progressive movements of the late 19th and early 20th century. They emphasized a service-oriented church actively engaged in helping to meet the day-to-day needs of its community, such as literacy, training, medical care, clothing, feeding the poor, and recreational services. Indeed, Burroughs argued in 1914 that no church should be allowed to stay in a community that does not positively improve community life. Pastor, are you doing these things? You still ain't had us in front of your church to talk about vaccine science. See, you didn't mention this in your presentation. You stuck with everything that was biased. Your methodology was flawed. Yep, it was flawed. You didn't have no research questions. The only reason we knew why you did the presentation is because you wanted to show all of this stuff about the Black church, right? Because they just did everything. We couldn't progress as a Black people without the Black church. Burroughs' vision of an engaged Black church was not limited, however, to the notion of spiritual and social service provider. Along with other Black Baptist women leaders like Willie Layton, she also actively encouraged Black women to enter the world of electoral politics, initially as church-based organizers and political educators, but then more emphatically as newly franchised voters after the passage of women's suffrage. Layton specifically urged the Black churches become centers for the voter education in an attempt to take political advantage of the growing numbers of northern Black urban dwellers during the Great Migration. Where your boy at? Where Pastor? Where you at? So now we on to public debates on Black religion and Black politics. See, we didn't get this from Pastor Bennett when he was going through his whole spiel about the Black church. Because in the early history, just dealing with the 1900s, we're seeing the same issues that we have today because the Black church is only absent in all the other areas. They are not teaching economics. They are not talking about health. They are not solving issues in the community. Drug abuse is up. Gang violence is up. Black on Black crime been an issue. The churches ain't serving shit. But here you are telling us all the good things the Black church has done in history, and then you relied on the knowledge of somebody that you said sees it on both sides and always give Christianity its just due. See? And then certain people call me a hater and all these whole other things because I pointed out flaws in your methodology that seemed to be a biggest issue, because I wasn't really concerned about your presentation. I was concerned about your methodology and your sources. Once I seen your methodology, and you know, you wrote books, Pastor, you went to school. I expected better. And then your sources were all biased. You didn't want to give us the other side, the people that were saying, come on, we need to use the black church better than what we're using it for. Because it's not resolving problems. Remember, at first, now, because you started out strong. At first, you was like, oh man, we were already Christian. We came over here, we got organized, we got to doing stuff. It was because of the church. The church, the church, the church, the church, the church, the black church, the black church, the black. That's all you kept saying. But you weren't over here saying that other leaders was trying to push the church to be more useful to solve problems in the community. You didn't say any of that. You stayed all the way away from that. Your research was biased. Now, concerns among certain black intellectuals and activists about social and political responsibility of the black church became much more public in the 20s and the early 30s, when a passionate debate about these issues played itself out on the pages of popular newspapers and magazines, both black and white. The proliferation of attention to the black church in this period stems from the several demographic, cultural, and political factors. This interwar period of economic depression had brought with it a steady stream of black migration, a rise in black church membership, and a growing variety of black religious sects developments apparent to many observers. Now, here we go. Garveyism, a movement that has been characterized as a religious movement itself, also rose to popularity during this time. This was an era also marked by the growth of circular black press, a fact usually overlooked in discussions of this period. As a consequence of that development, the domination of reporting about religious issues by black denominational publishing houses also came under challenge. Black newspapers in the late 20s and 30s reported widely on religion and on the activities of various churches and denominations. So let's stop right here. At a critical time in our history, in the 20s and the 30s, black newspapers was only talking about religion and other activities of various church and denominations. These papers also devoted prominent attention to the unscrupulous practices, financial and sexual, of black preachers and denominational leaders, including several notorious and escalating cases of alleged abuses. There also was a fair amount of sensationalized reporting on the emergence of alternative black religious groups, which were characterized as cults, including, for example, close attention to black Jews and followers of Father Divine, Elder Micah, Mache, Mother Catherine, and others. In all these ways, the black press itself emerged as a new form for considering the issues of black church political responsibility, and yet this was also a forum where the voices of black women in particular remained largely unheard, so that the public debates about the church's public duties and potential largely excluded the people most likely to be church members and church workers. The editorial pages and opinion columns in black newspapers in the 20s and 30s reflected several sides of the continuing debate about the political role of the black church, including the points of views men who staunchly defended the church against liberal critics, whether black or white. One example illustrates the complexity of these exchanges. In 1925, Keller Miller, who, as noted earlier, held his own critical views of the church, nonetheless uses his column in the Amsterdam News to counter the speech to the NAACP by Clarence Darrow, is which he reportedly had urged blacks to turn away from religion, to stop depending on God, and to learn to depend on themselves for their own advancement. I'm gonna run it back to you again. All right. The Amsterdam News to counter a speech to the NAACP by Clarence Darrow, he says, in which he reportedly had urged blacks to turn away from religion, to stop depending on God, and to learn to depend on themselves for their own advancement. Darrow, who had successfully defended a black Detroit doctor against charges of murder and protecting his home from attacks by a white mob, was considered an ally in the cause for Black justice, but Miller sharply chastised him for straying from the field of legal to that of religious advice. Miller argued that religious reliance had been the mainstay of Black existence and the survival, and that it also gave the race great moral advantage in its appeal to the conscience of white Americans, conceding that because they lacked the compulsion of power, Blacks were forced to rely on moral appeals. In effect, Miller carried forward an argument based on a view of the Black church as the institutional home for political and moral claims for racial advancement. Abandoning it without an alternative was unthinkable for him, even as he continued to criticize aspects of the Black church. This incident with Clarence DeRoe also drew Du Bois' attention, as he used the incident both to defend DeRoe's right to criticize Black churches and to praise the implicit arguments in those criticisms. In Du Bois' view, DeRoe was only saying what African-American church members were already saying, that the church was spending too much money for church edifices and not enough for the social uplift which Christianity stands for. Du Bois also used the incident to caution Black churches away from excluding distinct views. Now, later he associated specifically with white Christianity, arguing against the practices of letting the theological differences divide political allies. Du Bois concluded by asking, what difference does it make whether the whale swallowed Jonah or Jonah swallowed the whale, so long as justice, mercy, and peace prevail? What difference do it make? Now, even as Du Bois agreed with some of DeRoe's criticism, he did not argue for the outright rejection of the Black Christianity or the church itself, as DeRoe had suggested. In this way, Du Bois' stance was consistent with that of the other African Americans who questioned but did not dismiss the links between the Black religion and Black political empowerment. Perhaps the most notable aspect of his controversy is paucity of arguments of the church's or religious political irrelevance. In fact, Philip Randolph, the well-known sociologist and labor leader, took a cautious stance on the question of the place of Black religion in the struggles of the Black workers. I have a question, Pastor Bennett. Why you didn't mention DeRoe's comments? Why you didn't mention that people in this area was having this feeling that, hey, look, we need to be using the church to do more to solve our problems than what we're trying to do right now? But you let these people pump you up to think that you was gonna be right from your aspect of it. I see Satepara in the building. Now it says at the 1929 Conference on Labor and Religion, Randolph instead prodded the Black church to champion a Politarian philosophy and align itself with the struggle of Black workers who formed the mass of church members. But his arguments was couched in differential terms and offered with a homage to the importance of the church to past political gains made by the race. Now, this mixed approach owed itself to Randolph's own experience organizing Pullman reporters, where although he observed that it was rare to find a Black preacher who was committed to the cause of unionism per se, he also admitted that the church meeting spaces and financial support from individual preachers and churches had been crucial to his movement's strength. He included a list of those who had supported the Pullman Porters, calling them outstanding, independent, progressive, intellectual Negro preachers. So Randolph was not a dismissive critic, but rather a respectful one, asking for the church's continued support as a constructive social, educational, and spiritual service to the Negro workers, a plea socialist Randolph grounded in biblical imperative. If the church, white or Black, is to express the true philosophy of Jesus Christ, himself a worker, he concluded, it would not lend itself to the creed of oppressive capitalism, which would deny to the servant his just hire. Randolph remarks reminded leaders of Black political and civic organizations often depended Black churches for meeting space and support of their programs. Some Black religious leaders were especially irked when the same organizations would denounce Black churches, and the fact of their religious or on church resources was sometimes raised to the counter those criticisms. For example, when the NAACP Crisis magazine published an especially critical article on the Black Southern Church and the preachocracy, in 1935, an editorial writer defending the church in the Washington Tribune made just that point. Abuse of the church is a favorable thing for many Negro intellectuals, but when any of them desire to stage a drive or put over a program, straightway seeks the preacher to furnish the audience and the opportunity. See that argument right there? How they try to flip it. So I ain't gonna go too much further into this, but I'm gonna leave it there. I got all the articles in the description of the actual video, but it gets pretty interesting as you continue to read and go on from here. See, he didn't want to actually get into the Black church from another perspective. He only wanted to show the good side. You know what I'm saying? And then he appealed to authority and then throw these people in our face and say, like, this is Du Bois, this Carter G. Woodson, these all these people saying all this stuff about the church. You know what I'm saying? He did all of that. These ain't my words. These people words. But I remember Satepara saying something. I don't care nothing about them people words. What do you think? So he cherry-picked some of this information to make an argument for the Black church and try to sell it as if it was actually useful. It was useful. You know what I mean? But we do have critical thinkers that actually thought that the church could be used for more of a social agenda that actually would have helped us economically. So look at yourselves today. When you go into the church, do you see it as a useful tool for Black people in the community? Is the church serving the community, or is the community serving the church? That's a fair question. When somebody there, the church is there. When somebody die, why? Because they wanna hold the service for the family. That's money for them. They get paid off that, right? If the preacher's into embalming and getting the body together and all that old stuff and connected with the funeral home, they get money off that too. You know what I'm saying? So it's a money grab. It's a side business for them to actually do all of that and get the body together and do all that. So it is what it is. The funeral processions, they get paid for that. It ain't free. You pay for all that. So, Pastor Bennett, when we talk about the Black church, we need to talk about the whole complexity of it, man. I'm expecting you to deliver a presentation that's going to tell me the good and the bad and the ugly. We know what good came out of it, man. It's all in the history books. But what about what the people was actually saying in the church that had problems with what was going on? Like, you know, you my guy, you my pastor. I'm enjoying building this Black church, but man, we is behind. Why is we stuck in a belief? Why do we care about these stories? Why ain't they voices being heard? Why didn't you source these people in the church? He forgot all about the people in the people in the Congress that was saying, Pastor, we need to do more. We behind economically. So our social agenda is flat on the face. We ain't leading in politics. The use of the Black church today is useless overall. I'm not saying that there ain't some churches out there that might not be serving the community, but I just don't see the Black church serving its community. And we don't see it in the early 1900s either as people push it. But they are quick to throw these prominent people during this time in our face and say, well, these people were Christian. They believed in Jesus. Man, that's all they had was a belief. They ain't had nothing else. They fresh out of slavery. They're going through Reconstruction. The Klan is forming. Jim Crow on the rise. So I've been talking too long, man. I don't know if my brothers got something they want to say, man.
Nah, man, you've been going in. I would like to hear the response. So hopefully this gets to Brother Pastor Bennett. I see Mika in the chat saying she shared it to her back chat, so I don't know if he in there or not, but yeah, I would definitely like to hear a response because I don't agree with the sentiment that Christianity just did so much for the black community. Like, I definitely don't agree. But yeah, you did your thing, man.
And what he did,
What up, fellas?
What up?
Peace, Joe.
What's the business interview or whatever?
Yeah, he did a presentation on Garfield channel like a week or so ago. You know, I really was only looking at it for his methodology and his sources. You know what I'm saying? Once I uncovered that all his sources was biased, and his argument was to really just to pump up the black church, and talk about the black church was so instrumental in all these things, that he really didn't deal with all the facts. He didn't lay out all the arguments. You know, he used some Carter G. Woodson in there, but he didn't say the other side of things that Carter G. Woodson said. So it was biased. He used W.B. Du Bois, some stuff in there, W.B. Du Bois and many others, but he didn't say the other side of those things. Like, you're not telling us that these people were actually pushing to say, hey man, hey woman, hey preacher, we need an economic agenda, a healthcare agenda. We need to listen.
That's what I like to hear.
Man, if the church was the only game in town, like Unc stated, and it was, the utilization of the black church in the early history failed, and it even fails today.
Chef said we tripping.
Nah, I ain't tripping on nothing. I ain't leaving nothing out. I ain't leave nothing out in my presentation. These people were fighting to have more than just what was being said in that presentation he delivered. So you want to defend that, you defend that on your own. But I just think he kind of, you know what I mean, he's stirring the pot trolling. Cause he gonna argue with somebody about Christianity later. He gonna beat them up on their God. Yeah, man. Absolutely. I think he withheld information because he sourced Carter G. Woodson and W.E.B. Du Bois, but he don't tell us. Why didn't he tell us in his presentation what they were saying about the church? Like, man, you using the church wrong, Pastor. I tell you what, you get your congregation here, and then we can talk about the things that we could do together to move people forward. But that never happened because there was behind the scenes, there was some type of beef. The pastor was trying to sell people on the afterlife. Thank you. It wasn't the church, it was the people. They used the institutions to mask their activities. Absolutely correct, and I've been saying that. But we don't get that from people. Like Pastor Bennett left some stuff out. Why he didn't talk about that? That was key. And I read W.B. Du Bois info. Why? Why wasn't that in there? It was straight up biased, the whole presentation. I told you that I would watch it. For one, your methodology, your sources, and then I listened to your information after that. I did all three. Now, instead of me wasting my time putting together something to refute and debunk you, I decided to just use two of your people that you use in the presentation to argue the other side of the aisle. because you didn't address that. And then when I look at Tennessee history and deal with Tennessee history, you know, it was the Negro. So I was just trying to show you how powerful black people are. Without a church, black people have always been powerful. But man, yeah, man, I ain't gonna hold nobody else up. We rocked out for an hour 45, man. And my brothers ain't got nothing, man. That's it for me. Y'all already know what it is. Then on that note,
log in to KofiPaisaTV.com and get Spears of the Mossy Volume 1 by Kofi Paisa Research Team, from Spears the Pen Volume 2 by Kofi Paisa Research Team, Spiritual Combat Volume 3 by Kofi Paisa Research Team, One Night Before Bed by Any Harret Shun Calfunny, Kalawa's Trip to the Motherland by Kofi Paisa, From Cocaine to Consciousness by Any Harret Shun Calfunny, As I Learned, We All Learn by Kofi Paisa. Also, if you want fresh merch, go to our online store, Family Connect Apparel, and get all the brands. Also, get our 54 deck of quiz and educational cards available now on KofiPaisaTV.com.